I drove home after 2 weeks on a business trip. Everything should have been peaceful, but when I turned onto the dirt road leading down to Clearwater Lake, I saw a white sign planted right on the shore. For sale, exclusive lakefront living. Next to it stood 2 men in suits, pointing at the water and talking to a young couple. They were standing on my land. They were selling something that did not belong to them. If you have ever come home to find someone trying to sell your family's property without a single word of permission, comment below where you are watching from. Because what happened next completely changed the way I see trust, power, and justice. My name is Roger Brown, and this is how I exposed a 15-year fraud. Who gave you permission to put that sign on my land? The drive from Raleigh to Pinewood Grove takes about 2 hours if traffic cooperates. I had been away for 2 weeks, supervising a bridge construction project in the eastern part of the state, and all I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and sit on the dock watching the sunset over Clearwater Lake. That lake has been in my family since 1962, when my grandfather, Colonel James Brown, bought 30 acres of land after returning from his second tour in Vietnam. He built a small cabin by the water, raised my father there. And when he passed away 3 years ago, he left everything to me. Not because I asked for it, because he trusted me to protect it. I turned off the main road onto the gravel path that leads to my property. The afternoon sun was warm, the pine trees on both sides casting long shadows across the ground. Everything looked the same as when I left, until I reached the clearing near the lake. That is when I saw it. A white sign, brand new, was planted right on the shore about 50 feet from my dock. The words were printed in bold blue letters, "For sale, exclusive lakefront living, contact Thornton Realty." Next to the sign stood 2 men in dark suits, gesturing toward the water while a young couple nodded along, clearly impressed by whatever story they were being told. I stopped my truck and sat there for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. These people were standing on my land. Not HOA land, not community land, my land. The deed was in my filing cabinet. Inside the cabin my grandfather built with his own hands. I got out of the truck and walked toward them, keeping my pace steady even though my heart was pounding. The taller of the 2 agents noticed me first. He smiled the way salespeople smile when they think you are a potential buyer. "Good afternoon, sir. Are you interested in the property? We have 3 lots available with direct lake access, starting at $450,000. I stopped about 10 feet away from them. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was calm, but I could feel the anger building in my chest. The agent's smile faltered slightly. "I am sorry. Do you live nearby? This is a private showing for Pinewood Grove residents and prospective buyers." I pointed at the ground beneath his expensive leather shoes. "This is my property. That lake behind you belongs to me. So I am going to ask you one more time, what are you doing here? And who permitted you to put up that sign?" The young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. The second agent pulled out his phone and stepped away, speaking quietly to someone on the other end. The first agent held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion. This lake is part of the Pinewood Grove community amenities. We have authorization from the HOA president to conduct showings here. Perhaps you are thinking of a different property." I almost laughed. Almost. But there was nothing funny about strangers standing on land my grandfather bled for, telling me I was confused about what belonged to my own family, before I could respond. A white SUV pulled up behind my truck. A woman stepped out, maybe late 50s, with platinum blonde hair and a red blazer that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She walked toward us with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. "Mr. Brown," she said, extending her hand as if we were meeting at a cocktail party. "I am Sandra Thornton, president of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association. I understand there has been a small misunderstanding." I did not shake her hand. There is no misunderstanding. You have people trespassing on my property and a sign advertising lake access that you have no right to sell. Sandra's smile did not waver, but something shifted behind her eyes. Mr. Brown, I know you have been away, and I understand this might be confusing for someone who is not familiar with how community developments work. But this lake has been part of Pinewood Grove's amenities since the neighborhood was established 15 years ago. Your grandfather, rest his soul, agreed to that arrangement when the land was developed. She said it so smoothly, so confidently, that for a split second I almost doubted myself. Almost. My grandfather never sold this lake, I said. He sold 80 acres to the developer in 2009. The lake and the 30 acres surrounding it were explicitly excluded from that sale. I have the deed. I have the original contract. Sandra tilted her head, the way a teacher might look at a student who gave the wrong answer. Deeds can be interpreted in many ways, Mr. Brown, and 15 years of continuous community use establishes certain rights. I would hate to see you waste money on lawyers only to discover that the law does not support your claims. She glanced at the agents and the young couple. Why don't we continue this, showing Mr. Brown clearly needs some time to review his documents? That was when I realized what was happening. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a mistake. Sandra Thornton knew exactly what she was doing. She had been selling people a lie for 15 years, promising them lake access that was never hers to give, and she was betting that I would be too overwhelmed, too unsure, or too afraid of her 200 homeowners to fight back. I walked over to the sign, gripped it with both hands, and pulled it out of the ground. The agents stared at me. The young couple took several steps back. Sandra's smile finally cracked. Mr. Brown, I strongly advise you to put that back. Removal of HOA property is a violation of community guidelines and could result in legal action. I carried the sign to her SUV and leaned it against the rear bumper. This is not HOA property. It was on my land, so now it is my sign. Take it with you when you leave, which should be right now. Sandra straightened her blazer and looked at me with something between amusement and contempt. You may have a piece of paper, Mr. Brown, but I have 200 families who believe this lake belongs to them. I have 15 years of precedent. I have lawyers, board members, and a community that trusts me. So let me ask you something. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. Who do you think is going to win? She turned and walked back to her SUV without waiting for an answer. The agents followed, ushering the confused young couple into their car. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving only tire tracks on my grass and the faint smell of exhaust in the air. I stood there, looking at the lake my grandfather had loved more than almost anything in this world. The water was calm, reflecting the late afternoon sky like a mirror. He used to sit on that dock every evening, watching the sun go down, saying it was the only place he ever found peace after the war. And now someone was using it to sell lies to strangers. I walked back to the cabin and went straight to the filing cabinet in my grandfather's old office. The deed was exactly where I had left it, yellowed with age but perfectly legible, 30 acres, including Clearwater Lake, registered to James Michael Brown, dated March 15th, 1962. Below it was the 2009 sales contract with the developer, and right there in paragraph 7, underlined in my grandfather's handwriting, the lake and surrounding 30 acres are explicitly excluded from this transaction. But there was something else in the folder. A letter I had never seen before, dated 2010, addressed to Sandra Thornton, my grandfather's handwriting, still strong despite his age. The letter was short. Mrs. Thornton, I am writing to remind you for the final time that Clearwater Lake is not included in any agreement with the HOA or the developer. Any advertisement of lake access without my written consent constitutes fraud. Do not make me involve my lawyers. She had received this letter. She had known for 15 years, and she had kept selling the lie anyway. The cease and desist letter arrived exactly 24 hours after I pulled that sign out of the ground. 3 pages of dense language accusing me of harassment, interference with community property, and creating a hostile environment. The final paragraph warned that further actions would trigger immediate legal proceedings. I set it on the kitchen table next to my grandfather's 2010 letter to Sandra. One document was a threat. The other was proof she had been warned about her fraud and chose to ignore it. The contrast told me everything I needed to know about what kind of fight this was going to be. Sandra moved fast. That same afternoon, every homeowner in Pinewood Grove received an email with the subject line, "Urgent Community Alert Protecting Our Lake Access Rights." The message claimed that an individual living adjacent to the community was attempting to seize control of Clearwater Lake, a beloved amenity families had enjoyed for over a decade. It urged residents to attend an emergency board meeting to discuss protecting their investment. My name was not mentioned, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. Within hours, the community message board turned hostile. The first posts questioned whether my deed was legitimate. Then came accusations that I was exploiting my dead grandfather's memory for profit. By evening, people were calling me a con artist and suggesting I had no right to live in the cabin at all. Someone drove past my property after dark and threw a bag of garbage onto my driveway. The escalation from suspicion to dehumanization took less than 12 hours. The emergency board meeting was held at the Pinewood Grove Community Center, a building constructed on land my grandfather once owned. I arrived early, but Sandra had already arranged the room to her advantage. Board members sat at a long table facing the audience, nameplates polished, folders stacked neatly in front of each seat. She stood at a podium with a microphone, welcoming residents as they filed in, shaking hands, touching shoulders, calling people by their first names. When she saw me enter, her smile widened slightly. She had the high ground, the home field, and an audience of nearly 150 people who had paid premium prices for homes with promised lake access. I took a seat in the back row. Speaking now would only legitimize her framing. I needed to watch, listen, and understand exactly how deep this went before I made my move. Sandra opened with what she called a brief history of Clearwater Lake. According to her version, the original landowner had verbally agreed to share access with residents as part of the development. She acknowledged some ambiguity in the paperwork, but emphasized that long-standing community use had established certain rights. Her voice was measured, reasonable, almost sympathetic. She talked about families who had built memories by that water, children who had learned to swim there, couples who had fallen in love watching sunsets from the shore. She made it personal. She made it emotional. And she never once mentioned that she had been selling those memories for profit through her own real estate company. Then she introduced Gerald Hoffman, the HOA attorney, who explained the adverse possession law. Under North Carolina statute, he said, 15 years of open and continuous use could transfer access rights when the original owner failed to object. He delivered it with the confidence of a settled fact, citing case numbers I could not verify and precedents he did not explain. The audience nodded along, reassured by the legal jargon they did not fully understand. When Sandra called for a vote to authorize legal action against me, not a single board member hesitated. 7-0. 150 people applauded. A woman 2 rows ahead of me turned around and stared, her expression a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. Sandra caught my eye across the room and gave me a small nod, as if to say, "This is what happens when you challenge me." I remained seated, face neutral, hands still. Let them think I was defeated. Let them think this was over. The more confident they felt tonight, the less prepared they would be for what came next. After the meeting, I called Marcus Chen, a property lawyer I knew from college. I read him the deed, the 2009 contract, and the explicit exclusion clause. His response was direct. "Roger, Adverse possession requires the owner to have abandoned the property or failed to assert rights. Your grandfather's letter proves he did assert them. Sandra ignored him. But ignoring a warning does not transfer ownership. He paused. The problem is not the law. The law is on your side. The problem is money. Litigation costs $50,000 minimum. Sandra is betting you will run out of resources before she runs out of community support. Her weapon is not precedent. It is exhaustion. I thanked him and hung up. He was right. Sandra was not trying to win in court. She was trying to win by making my life so difficult that I would give up. I opened my laptop and started searching. Thornton Realty, Pinewood Grove, Lake Access. The listings came up quickly. Every home Sandra had sold mentioned the lake, private access, exclusive waterfront community, fishing, swimming, and boating are included. I stopped counting at 47 properties. Some buyers had paid $40,000 or $50,000 extra for lots closer to the water. Total transaction value across those sales over $35 million. The pattern was unmistakable. This was not a dispute over interpretation. This was systematic fraud built on a lie Sandra had been telling since the day the first home sold. I screenshot every listing and saved them to a folder. Then I looked at the lake through the window, dark and still under the evening sky. Sandra thought tonight's vote meant victory. She thought the applause and the threats would make me disappear. But she had made a critical mistake. She assumed I was like everyone else she had pressured over the years, that I would choose peace over principle. My grandfather could have sold this lake for millions. Developers made offers constantly. He always refused. He told me once that some things are not about money. Some things are about what you protect and what you leave behind. The question was whether anyone else in Pinewood Grove had figured out they had been lied to. 47 families had paid for something that did not exist. At least one of them must have realized the truth by now. And if I could find that person, I would not be fighting alone. 3 days after the board meeting, a deputy from the county sheriff's office showed up at my cabin. He was polite but cautious, one hand resting near his belt as he explained why he was there. Someone had filed a complaint alleging that I had threatened Pinewood Grove residents and made aggressive statements at a public meeting. The deputy asked if I would be willing to answer a few questions. I invited him inside, showed him the deed, the 2009 contract, and my grandfather's letter to Sandra. I explained the situation calmly, without raising my voice, without showing anger. He listened, took notes, and eventually nodded. Mr. Brown, I do not see any evidence of criminal behavior on your part, but I have to document the complaint. My advice is to keep your distance from HOA events and avoid any confrontations. He left without issuing any citation. But the message was clear. Sandra had escalated from legal threats to law enforcement. She was building a paper trail, making me look like the aggressor, one official report at a time. The next morning, I discovered that the gravel road leading to my cabin had been blocked. Someone had placed orange traffic cones and a handwritten sign that read, "Private HOA Road, Residents Only." The road ran across a narrow strip of land that had been part of the original developer purchase, which meant technically it was not mine. But it had been used as access to my property for over 60 years, long before Pinewood Grove existed. I called the county transportation office to ask about the legality of blocking a road that served as the only access to a private residence. The clerk said she would look into it and get back to me within 5 to 7 business days. 5 to 7 days of being unable to drive to my own home without moving cones that the HOA could claim I had vandalized. I moved them anyway, took photographs of their placement, and documented the date and time. If Sandra wanted to play the paperwork game, I would match her document for document. That afternoon, I drove into town to pick up supplies from the hardware store. The owner, a man named Dale who had sold me materials for cabin repairs half a dozen times, looked uncomfortable when I walked in. He glanced toward the back of the store, then back at me. "Roger, I am sorry, but I cannot help you today," I said. He shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. "I got a lot of customers from Pinewood Grove. Good customers. And right now, serving you would cause problems I do not need." He did not say who had told him this. He did not need to. I thanked him for his honesty and left. On my way out, I passed two women in the parking lot who stopped talking the moment they saw me. One of them pulled out her phone and started recording. I kept walking, got in my truck, and drove away without looking back. The isolation was spreading. Sandra was not just fighting me in boardrooms and courthouses, she was cutting me off from the basic infrastructure of daily life. The situation reached my workplace by the end of the week. I was sitting in a project meeting when my supervisor asked to speak with me privately afterward. He closed his office door and sat down with the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "Roger, I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be concerned about your involvement in a legal dispute. They suggested that your behavior has been erratic and potentially fraudulent." He held up his hand before I could respond. "I am not accusing you of anything. Your work here has been excellent, but I need to understand what is happening, because this call came from someone who knew details about your personal life that they should not have known." I spent the next hour explaining the situation, showing him the documents on my phone, and walking him through the timeline. He listened carefully, asked a few questions, and eventually nodded. "I believe you, but you should know that whoever made that call was trying to get you fired. Watch your back." I thanked him and returned to my desk, but I could feel the shift in the room. Co-workers who had chatted with me freely now kept their distance. The accusation had not succeeded, but it had planted seeds of doubt that would be difficult to remove. Amy called me that night, her voice tight with controlled anger. She had received an anonymous message through her hospital's internal system, sent from a temporary account that had been deleted immediately after. The message said, "Your boyfriend is a land thief who is trying to steal from families. You should know who you are really dating." Amy worked in the pediatric unit. Her colleagues trusted her. Her reputation mattered for her career in ways that mine did not. "I am not leaving you," she said before I could ask. "But Roger, these people are trying to destroy your life piece by piece. They went after your job. They went after me. What happens when they go after something you cannot defend?" I did not have an answer. I told her I loved her, that I was sorry she had been dragged into this, and that I would find a way to end it. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind move through the pines outside my window. The next day, I installed security cameras around the cabin and along the shore of the lake. 4 cameras total, each with night vision and motion detection, all feeding to a cloud storage system that could not be tampered with locally. I was not expecting violence, but I was done being caught off guard. Every interaction, every trespass, every piece of evidence would be recorded from now on. I also drafted a formal cease and desist letter through Marcus, addressed to Sandra Thornton personally, demanding that she stop making false statements about me and retract the claims in her community email. Marcus warned me that it would probably just make her angrier. I told him that was fine. Anger makes people sloppy, and Sandra had been careful for too long. That evening, I sat on the dock and watched the sun set over Clearwater Lake. The water was calm, reflecting orange and pink and gold across its surface. My grandfather used to say that this lake had a memory, that it held on to everything that happened around it, good and bad. I wondered what it would remember about these weeks. The accusations, the isolation, the slow tightening of pressure from every direction. Sandra wanted me to feel trapped, to believe that fighting back was pointless, and for a moment, sitting there alone. I almost did. But then I thought about those 47 families. 47 households had paid for a lie. Some of them had to know by now. Some of them had to be angry. And if I could find just one person willing to tell the truth, everything would change. I pulled out my phone and started searching public records for property sales in Pinewood Grove. Names, dates, purchase prices. Somewhere in that list was an ally I had not met yet. I just had to find them before Sandra found a way to silence me completely. I stopped responding. No more confrontations, no more arguments in parking lots or tense exchanges at the hardware store. When Sandra sent another community email announcing that the HOA had retained outside counsel to pursue the lake access case, I did not reply. When someone spray-painted the word thief on the wooden sign at the entrance to my property, I photographed it, cleaned it off, and said nothing. The cameras recorded 2 teenagers running back toward Pinewood Grove after the vandalism, but I did not report it to the sheriff. Let Sandra think she was winning. Let the whole community believe I had given up. The quieter I became, the more careless they would get. 2 weeks after I went silent, Sandra held another board meeting, according to the minutes, which a sympathetic neighbor forwarded to me anonymously. She told the residents that the lake access dispute had been effectively resolved. "Mr. Brown has not filed any legal action," she said. "He has not attended any community functions. He has not made any public statements. I believe he has finally accepted the reality of the situation." The board voted to proceed with plans for a new dock and swimming platform on the lakeshore, with construction to begin in the spring. $120,000 allocated from HOA reserves. Sandra was so confident in her victory that she was already spending money on infrastructure she had no right to build. Meanwhile, I was building something else entirely. I hired a private investigator named Walter, a retired insurance fraud specialist who had been recommended by Marcus. His job was simple: find families who had left Pinewood Grove and were willing to talk about why. Former residents who might have discovered the truth about lake access and moved away rather than fight. Walter charged $300 a day plus expenses, but within a week, he had already identified 4 households that had sold their homes within 2 years of purchase. 3 of them declined to speak with him. The 4th, a couple named Robert and Linda Callahan, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Raleigh. Robert was 60 years old, retired from the Postal Service, with the cautious demeanor of someone who had learned not to trust easily. Linda sat beside him, arms crossed, watching me with sharp eyes that missed nothing. They had purchased their home in Pinewood Grove in 2012, paying an extra $40,000 for a lot that backed up to the lake. "Sandra showed us the property herself," Robert said, stirring his coffee slowly. "She walked us down to the water, pointed at the dock, and told us we could fish there any time we wanted. Private lake access," she said, "exclusive to Pinewood Grove residents. That was the whole reason we chose this community over 3 others. Linda leaned forward. "6 months after we moved in, we tried to put a kayak in the water. Some woman came out of nowhere and told us we were trespassing on private property. When we complained to Sandra, she said there had been a policy change and dock access was temporarily suspended. I asked what happened next. Robert shook his head. Nothing. We pushed back, asked for documentation, and demanded to see the original agreement. Sandra kept stalling, kept saying it was being reviewed, kept promising it would be resolved soon. After 2 years of that, we sold the house and moved. Lost about $30,000 on the sale because by then other people were starting to figure out the lake access was not real. He looked at me directly. We thought we were the only ones. We thought we had just made a bad decision. We did not know she was doing this to everyone. I showed them the deed, the 2009 contract, and my grandfather's letter. Robert read each document carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief to something that looked like vindicated anger. She knew, he said quietly. She knew the whole time. And she kept selling the lie anyway. Before I left, I asked if they would be willing to provide a written statement about their experience. Robert hesitated. Linda did not. Absolutely, she said. That woman took $40,000 from us and called it a misunderstanding. If there is a way to hold her accountable, we want to be part of it. I thanked them both and promised to stay in touch. On the drive back to the cabin, I called Walter and asked him to dig deeper. I needed at least 3 more families willing to go on record. I needed a pattern that could not be dismissed as isolated incidents. The next step was procedural. I filed a preliminary complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, documenting the discrepancy between Thornton Realty's listing claims and the actual property boundaries. I also submitted a formal request to the county sheriff's office for body camera footage from the deputy who had visited my cabin. Under state law, I had a right to any recordings that involved me directly. The request would take 30 days to process, but when it arrived, it would show exactly what I had told the deputy versus what Sandra had claimed in her complaint. Every piece of evidence, every document, every recorded conversation was another brick in the wall I was building around her lies. I also made contact with a journalist named Diane Reeves, who covered real estate and consumer protection stories for a regional news outlet. She had written several articles about HOA abuses and predatory development practices, and her name kept appearing when I searched for reporters who understood this kind of case. I sent her a brief email outlining the situation without naming Sandra directly, asking if she would be interested in learning more. She responded within 2 hours, asking for a phone call. We talked for 45 minutes. By the end, she said she could not promise anything, but the pattern I was describing, if documented properly, was exactly the kind of story her readers cared about. "Find me 5 families," she said. "Get me documentation, and when you are ready to go public, call me first." That night, Amy came over after her shift at the hospital. She looked tired but calm, the way she always did after a long day of caring for sick children. We sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge over the lake, and I told her about the Callahans, about the Real Estate Commission complaint, about the journalist. She listened without interrupting, then reached over and squeezed my hand. "I had a patient's mother today," she said. "An older woman named Martha Harris. We got to talking while her grandson was sleeping, and she mentioned she used to live in Pinewood Grove. Sold her house in 2016 after some dispute with the HOA. Amy paused, looking at me. I asked what kind of dispute. She said they promised her lake access when she bought the place, and she found out later it was not true. But here is the thing. Roger, she said she has an email from Sandra personally guaranteeing exclusive lake access as part of her homeownership benefits. She kept it because she did not trust Sandra from the beginning. I sat up straight. An email. Written documentation. Not just verbal promises or listing descriptions, but a direct statement from Sandra herself, guaranteeing something she knew she could not deliver. "Can you get me in touch with her?" I asked. Amy nodded. She gave me her number. She said she would be happy to talk to anyone who was finally willing to hold that woman accountable. I looked out at the lake, its surface smooth and black under the night sky. Sandra thought I had given up. She thought her silence had won. But somewhere in Raleigh, an old woman had a piece of paper that could bring everything crashing down. And in less than a week, I would have it in my hands. Sandra found out I was talking to former residents. I do not know how. Maybe someone saw me meeting with the Callahans in Raleigh. Maybe one of the families Walter contacted tipped her off. Maybe she had been watching me more closely than I realized. Whatever the source. Her response was swift and devastating. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after I had gone quiet. Every resident in Pinewood Grove received a new email from the HOA board. This one was different from the previous alerts. This one had my name in the subject line. The email accused me of conducting a coordinated harassment campaign against community members. It claimed I had been approaching former residents with false information, attempting to recruit them into a frivolous lawsuit designed to extract money from hardworking families. It called me a con artist exploiting my deceased grandfather's legacy. It suggested I had fabricated documents to support my claims. And it included a photograph, apparently taken from someone's car, showing me entering the coffee shop where I had met the Callahans. The caption read, "Roger Brown meeting with individuals recruited for his fraudulent scheme." Within hours, the community message board had over 200 comments. People called me a predator, a scammer, a man who would steal from his own neighbors to line his pockets. Someone created an online petition titled, "Protect Pinewood Grove from Roger Brown," and collected 150 signatures in less than 48 hours. The professional attack came next. My supervisor called me into his office for the second time in a month. His expression was grimmer than before. "Roger, I received a formal complaint this morning. A letter on HOA letterhead, signed by their attorney, alleging that you have been using company time and resources to conduct a personal harassment campaign." He slid the letter across his desk. It was 3 pages long, filled with legal language about potential liability, reputational damage, and corporate responsibility. "I know you said this was a property dispute, but this letter is claiming you are engaged in fraud. My bosses are asking questions I cannot answer." I spent an hour walking him through everything again, showing him the documents, explaining the timeline. He believed me, but belief was not enough. "I am putting you on administrative leave," he said finally. "Paid. For now. Until this gets sorted out. I am sorry. Roger." My hands are tied. I drove home in a daze. Paid leave sounded better than termination, but it meant Sandra had effectively removed me from my job without firing a single shot. She had weaponized my employer's fear of liability, turning my own company into an instrument of her campaign. By the time I reached the cabin, I had 3 voicemails from numbers I did not recognize. 2 reporters were asking for comment on the allegations against me. The third was a woman's voice, shaky and uncertain, saying she had seen the petition online and wanted to know if the things people were saying were true. I deleted all 3 and sat in my truck for a long time, staring at the lake through the windshield. Amy called that evening. Her voice was strained in a way I had never heard before. "They came after me at work today," she said. Not an anonymous message this time. A formal complaint to hospital administration, claiming I was helping you harass HOA residents by sharing patient information. I felt my stomach drop. "Amy, you never shared any patient information. Martha Harris talked to you voluntarily, in a waiting room, about her own experience." She exhaled slowly. "I know that. You know that." But the complaint triggered an internal review. I had to sit with HR for 2 hours explaining why a patient's mother mentioned Pinewood Grove to me in casual conversation. They cleared me. But Roger, the way they looked at me, she trailed off. I could hear the exhaustion in her silence. "Some of my coworkers live in that neighborhood. They have been avoiding me all week. One of them asked if it was true that you were a con artist. I did not know what to say." I wanted to apologize. I wanted to tell her to walk away, to protect herself, to let me fight this battle alone. But before I could speak, she cut me off. "Do not even think about it," she said. "I am not leaving, but you need to end this soon, Roger, not just for you, for both of us." I promised her I would. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and thought about what Sandra had accomplished in less than a week. She had turned the community against me. She had neutralized my income. She had targeted the woman I loved. And she had done it all without ever meeting me face to face, without ever having to defend her lies in public. This was reputation warfare at its most efficient, and I was losing. The next morning, I drove to Raleigh to meet Martha Harris. She was 72 years old, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and a gaze that suggested she had seen enough nonsense in her lifetime to recognize it instantly. We sat in her living room, surrounded by photographs of grandchildren and framed certificates from decades of teaching. She listened as I explained what was happening, nodding occasionally, asking sharp questions about timelines and documentation. When I finished, She stood up, walked to a filing cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a manila folder. "I have been waiting for someone to take this seriously," she said. "When I bought my house in 2015, Sandra Thornton sent me this email personally. I printed it and saved it because something about that woman never sat right with me." She handed me the folder. Inside was a single printed page. An email dated April 12th, 2015. The sender was Sandra Thornton, using her Thornton Realty address. The subject line read, "Welcome to Pinewood Grove, your lake access confirmation." The body of the email was brief but devastating. "Dear Mrs. Harris, as HOA president, I personally guarantee that all Pinewood Grove residents have exclusive access to Clearwater Lake as part of their home ownership benefits. This includes fishing, swimming, and the use of the community dock. Welcome to the neighborhood. Personally guarantee. Exclusive access. Home ownership benefits." In writing, with her name attached. I looked at Martha. "May I keep this?" She nodded. "Take it. Use it. I do not care what happens to me. I am 72 years old, and I have nothing left to lose. But that woman took $35,000 from me for a lie. If you can make her answer for it, I will testify in court. I will talk to reporters. I will stand in front of a judge and tell everyone exactly what she promised me." I thanked her and drove back to the cabin with the email sitting on my passenger seat like a loaded weapon. That night, I called Diane Reeves, the journalist. I told her I had 4 families willing to go on record, including written documentation directly from Sandra. I told her about the petition, the smear campaign, the attacks on my job, and my girlfriend. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The HOA annual meeting is in 3 weeks. If you are going to confront her, that is the place to do it. Maximum witnesses, maximum pressure, and if she loses control in public, that is the story that writes itself." I asked if she would be there. "I would not miss it," she said. "Just make sure you have everything ready. You only get one shot at this." I hung up and looked at the email on my kitchen table. Sandra thought she had broken me. She thought the petition and the job loss, and the attacks on Amy had pushed me to the edge. She was right about one thing. I was at the edge. But I was not falling. I was getting ready to push back. The lawsuit arrived 1 week before the annual HOA meeting. A courier knocked on my cabin door at 7 in the morning, handed me a thick envelope, and asked me to sign for it. I knew what it was before I opened it. Sandra Thornton, individually and as president of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association, was suing me for defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Total damages claimed $500,000. The complaint ran 47 pages, filled with accusations that I had spread malicious falsehoods about Sandra's business practices, contacted her clients with the intent to destroy her reputation, and caused severe emotional harm through my campaign of harassment. It demanded a jury trial and requested an emergency injunction to prevent me from making any further public statements about Pinewood Grove or its leadership. I called Marcus immediately. He had already heard about the lawsuit through the legal grapevine. "It is a slap suit," he said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. Sandra does not expect to win in court. She expects you to run out of money defending yourself before you ever get to trial." He explained that slap suits were designed to silence critics by burying them in legal fees. North Carolina had an anti-slap statute that allowed defendants to file a motion to dismiss and recover attorney costs, but the process still required time, money, and energy. "Filing the anti-slap motion will cost you about $8,000, Marcus said. "If we lose, you are looking at $50,000 or more to take this to trial, and even if we win, it will take months. She is trying to drain you before the annual meeting." I asked what he recommended. He was quiet for a moment. "File the motion. Fight back. But understand that Sandra is betting everything on exhausting you. If you are not prepared to see this through to the end, now is the time to walk away." I hung up and sat in my grandfather's office for a long time. The photograph on the wall showed him standing by the lake in 1975, young and strong, smiling at something outside the frame. He had built this cabin with his own hands. He had raised a family here. He had watched sunsets from that dock for almost 50 years. And now a woman who had never met him was trying to take it all away. Not through honest dispute, but through intimidation and financial pressure. I thought about the $500,000 lawsuit. I thought about my job, suspended indefinitely. I thought about Amy, whose career had been threatened because she cared about me. I thought about the 200 residents of Pinewood Grove who believed I was a con artist because Sandra had told them so. For the first time since this started, I genuinely considered giving up. Amy came over that evening. She found me sitting on the dock, staring at the water, the lawsuit papers spread across my lap. She sat down beside me without saying anything, just close enough that our shoulders touched. We stayed like that for several minutes, watching the light fade from the sky. Finally, she spoke. "You are thinking about quitting." It was not a question. I nodded slowly. "She has $500,000 worth of lawyers, and I have a cabin and some documents. Even if I am right, even if I win, what does it cost me? What does it cost you?" Amy picked up one of the lawsuit pages and looked at it. "Do you know why your grandfather kept this lake?" she asked. I told her what he had always told me, that it was the only place he found peace after everything he saw in the war, that some things are more important than money. Amy set the paper down. "I talked to Martha Harris again yesterday. She told me something your grandfather said to her once. Years ago, when she first moved to Pinewood Grove, she asked him why he did not just sell the lake to the developer and retire rich. You know what he said?" I shook my head. "He said that the lake was not his to sell. He said it belonged to everyone who would come after him, and his job was just to make sure the wrong people did not get their hands on it." She turned to look at me directly. "Sandra is the wrong person. Roger. And if you quit now, she wins. Not just the lake. She wins the right to keep lying to families for another 15 years. Is that what your grandfather would have wanted?" I did not answer, but I did not have to. She already knew what I was going to do. The next morning, Walter called with news. He had been tracking down former board members from Pinewood Grove, people who had served with Sandra over the years and might have witnessed her decision-making up close. Most of them refused to talk. But one woman, a retired accountant named Evelyn Porter, who had resigned from the board in 2018, agreed to meet with him. She had kept copies of certain documents from her time on the board, documents she believed might be relevant to what I was trying to prove. Walter drove to her house in Wilmington and came back with a single piece of paper that changed everything. It was an internal memo, dated October 3, 2010, written by Sandra Thornton and distributed to all board members at the time. The memo was a response to my grandfather's letter, the one warning Sandra to stop advertising lake access. The text was brief and damning. "Board members, I have received correspondence from Mr. James Brown regarding lake access claims. Please disregard. Mr. Brown is elderly and unlikely to pursue legal action. We will continue marketing lake access as a community amenity. Do not discuss this matter with residents." Do not discuss. Continue marketing. Unlikely to pursue legal action. Sandra had known the truth for 15 years. She had acknowledged it in writing, and she had instructed her board to keep lying anyway. I called Marcus and told him about the memo. He was silent for a long moment. "Roger, if this document is authentic, and if Evelyn Porter will testify to its origin, Sandra's entire defense collapses. This is not ambiguity. This is not an interpretation. This is documented intent to defraud." I asked him what we should do. "File the anti-slap motion tomorrow. Include the memo as an exhibit, and get ready for the annual meeting, because when Sandra sees this, she is going to panic." I thanked him and hung up. Then I walked outside, down to the lake, and stood at the edge of the water. The sun was setting, painting the surface gold and orange and red. Sandra thought the lawsuit would break me. She thought $500,000 in threatened damages would make me disappear. But she had made the same mistake she had made 15 years ago with my grandfather. She assumed that people who stayed quiet had nothing to say. She assumed that patience meant weakness. She was wrong then. She was wrong now. I walked back to the cabin, picked up my phone, and called Diane Reeves. "The annual meeting is in 6 days," I said. "I have everything I need. Are you ready?" She laughed softly. "I have been ready for weeks. Just tell me when and where." I gave her the details and hung up. Then I walked to the gate at the entrance to my property, the one that led down to the lake shore, and locked it. For the first time in 3 years. Clearwater Lake was officially closed to everyone except me. The annual meeting of the Pinewood Grove Homeowners Association was held on a Thursday evening in late October. The community center was packed. Nearly 180 residents filled the rows of folding chairs, with more standing along the walls and in the back. Sandra sat at the front table with 5 board members and Gerald Hoffman, the HOA attorney. She wore a navy blue suit and a confident smile, the expression of someone who believed she had already won. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat in the last row, near the exit. A few people turned to look at me. Some whispered to their neighbors. One woman pulled out her phone, probably to document my presence. I kept my face neutral and my hands folded in my lap. Inside my jacket pocket was a USB drive containing every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past 2 months. In my other pocket was my phone, set to record audio. Diane Reeves sat 3 rows ahead of me, a small camera bag at her feet. Sandra opened the meeting with her usual polish. She thanked everyone for attending, praised the community's resilience, and outlined the agenda for the evening. The final item was listed simply as Lake Access Update. When she reached that point, her tone shifted from administrative to personal. "As many of you know, our community has been under attack," she said. "An individual living adjacent to Pinewood Grove has been spreading false claims about our lake access rights. He has harassed former residents. He has contacted our business partners with malicious accusations, and he has filed frivolous complaints with state agencies in an attempt to damage our reputation." She paused, letting the words settle. "Tonight, I am asking the board to approve a special assessment of $500 per household to fund our legal defense. We will not allow one person to destroy what we have built together." The room murmured in agreement. Hoffman nodded solemnly. Sandra looked out at the audience, searching for me. And when our eyes met, she smiled. It was the smile of someone who believed she was untouchable. I raised my hand. "Mr. Brown," she said, her voice dripping with false courtesy, "do you have something you would like to say?" I stood up slowly. "I would like to address the community, if the board will permit it." Hoffman leaned toward Sandra and whispered something. She shook her head slightly, but before she could respond, a man in the front row spoke up. "Let him talk. If he is lying, we will know. If he is not, we deserve to hear it." Other voices joined in, demanding that I be given a chance to speak. Sandra's smile tightened. "Very well. Mr. Brown, you have 5 minutes." I walked to the front of the room, feeling 180 pairs of eyes tracking my every step. I did not bring notes. I did not need them. I had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. Not the words, but the sequence. Evidence first, emotion never. Let the documents speak for themselves. I plugged the USB drive into the projector system and turned to face the crowd. "I am not here to argue," I said. "I am here to show you what I found. You can decide for yourselves what it means." The first image appeared on the screen behind me. It was the deed from 1962, yellowed but legible, showing my grandfather's name and the legal description of the property. This is the original deed to Clearwater Lake and the 30 acres surrounding it. It has been in my family for over 60 years. It has never been sold, transferred, or assigned to any other party. Sandra shifted in her seat but said nothing. I clicked to the next slide. The 2009 sales contract, with paragraph 7 highlighted. When my grandfather sold 80 acres to the developer who built Pinewood Grove, he explicitly excluded the lake from the transaction. This is not ambiguous. This is not open to interpretation. The lake was never part of the deal. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Someone in the middle rows said, "Then why did Sandra tell us we had access?" I did not answer directly. Instead, I clicked to the next slide. My grandfather's letter from 2010, addressed to Sandra Thornton. My grandfather sent this letter to Mrs. Thornton 15 years ago, warning her that any advertisement of lake access without his consent constituted fraud. He asked her to stop. She received this letter. I paused. She did not stop. Sandra stood up. "This is ridiculous. That letter proves nothing. Your grandfather was confused, and I was simply trying to maintain community harmony." I nodded calmly and clicked to the next slide. The internal memo, dated October 2010, was distributed to all board members. I read it aloud. Board members, I have received correspondence from Mr. James Brown regarding lake access claims. Please disregard. Mr. Brown is elderly and unlikely to pursue legal action. We will continue marketing lake access as a community amenity. Do not discuss this matter with residents. The room went silent. Sandra's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. I ignored the question and clicked to the next slide. Martha Harris's email from 2015. This is an email sent by Mrs. Thornton to a homeowner in this community, personally guaranteeing exclusive lake access as part of her homeownership benefits. Personally guarantee. Those are her words. In writing. The murmurs became louder. People were turning to look at Sandra, their expressions shifting from confusion to anger. A woman near the front stood up. "I got an email like that too, when I bought my house in 2014. Another voice from the back. "She told me the same thing at the open house." Sandra gripped the edge of the table. "These documents are fabricated. This man is a con artist who has been manipulating all of you." I clicked on the final slide, a summary of 47 property listings from Thornton Realty, each one advertising lake access, private waterfront, and exclusive amenities. Total transaction value highlighted at the bottom over $35 million. 47 families, I said quietly. 47 households paid premium prices for a promise that was never real. This is not a misunderstanding. This is systematic fraud. Sandra lost control. She slammed her hand on the table and pointed at me, her voice rising to a shout. "You have no right to come into my community and accuse me of fraud. Your grandfather was a senile old man who did not understand what he was signing. That lake belongs to us. It has always belonged to us. And if you think some piece of paper from 60 years ago is going to change that, you are as delusional as he was." The room erupted. People shouted questions and accusations. Sandra kept yelling, her face red, her composure completely shattered, and in the chaos. I saw Diane Reeves stand up, her camera now openly recording, capturing every word Sandra said. Sandra saw her too. She stopped mid-sentence, staring at the lens, realizing what she had just done. For 15 years, she had maintained the lie through control and careful messaging. In 30 seconds of anger, she had destroyed it all. Robert Callahan rose from his seat in the fourth row. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Sandra Thornton as HOA president." The room fell silent. Sandra looked around desperately, searching for allies. but the faces staring back at her offered nothing. Hoffman gathered his papers and stepped away from the table. The board members exchanged glances, none of them willing to meet Sandra's eyes. She turned toward the exit, but residents had already moved to block the aisle. They were not threatening her. They were not touching her. They simply stood there, waiting, demanding answers she could no longer give. For the first time since I had met her, Sandra Thornton had nowhere to run. The vote of no confidence passed 156 to 24. When the count was announced, something broke in the room. Not anger, not triumph. Just a silence that felt like the air after a detonation. When people realize the ground beneath them has shifted and will not shift back. Sandra did not argue. She did not defend herself. She gathered her folder, walked toward the side exit, and disappeared through the door without looking at anyone. 5 board members followed within the hour, submitting resignations by text message before they reached their cars. 15 years of control ended not with confrontation, but with absence. By the time I stepped outside, the parking lot was half empty, and the people who remained stood in small clusters, speaking in voices too low to carry. Sandra did not reappear. Her office at Thornton Realty stayed dark, blinds closed, parking lot empty. No statement, no interview requests accepted, no social media activity, just silence. The kind that does not signal surrender, but calculation. Her attorney released a single sentence saying Mrs. Thornton denied all wrongdoing and would cooperate with any investigation. It meant nothing. Cooperation is easy to promise and easier to delay. What mattered was that Sandra had not been held accountable yet. She had simply vanished into the gap between exposure and consequence, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. The consequences came faster than I expected. Diane Reeves published her story the next morning, and by evening it had spread to 3 regional outlets and a dozen real estate forums. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission opened a formal investigation. 12 families filed a class action lawsuit. The county district attorney's office announced a preliminary inquiry into potential criminal fraud charges. And 4 days after the meeting, Marcus called to tell me Sandra had withdrawn her SLAPP lawsuit. Her attorney cited the client's decision not to pursue the matter further. She is reducing exposure, Marcus said, trying to look cooperative before the real cases go to trial. I asked if it changed anything for the other plaintiffs. He said it did not. Sandra's retreat from one front did not protect her on the others. If anything, it made her look guilty. A man knocked on my cabin door the following week. His name was Thomas. He had been the one who threw garbage on my driveway. He stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched, unable to meet my eyes. I believed her, he said. Everything she said. I did not ask questions. You were easier to hate than the truth. He paused, struggling for words that would not come. I told him I understood. He nodded once, turned, and walked away. I watched him disappear down the gravel road and felt nothing clean, not forgiveness, not satisfied. Just the uncomfortable recognition that most people will follow authority until it collapses, and then pretend they never did. Thomas was not evil. He was ordinary. That was worse. The question I could not avoid was the lake. Property values in Pinewood Grove had already started falling. Families were talking about selling. Others demanded that someone negotiate an arrangement with me, as if 15 years of fraud could be resolved with a contract and a monthly fee. People approached me in town, called the number that had somehow become public, and asked variations of the same question, "What are you going to do?" Some asked with fear, some with resentment, a few with something that sounded like hope. Though I did not know what they were hoping for, I did not have an answer. The truth was that I had spent so long fighting Sandra that I had not fully considered what I was fighting for. Sandra's attorney made one final attempt, $200,000, No public admission. No cooperation with the class action, just a check and a quiet exit. Marcus relayed the offer without commentary. I rejected it in one sentence. It was not my place to decide whether Sandra faced consequences for what she had done to the Callahans, to Martha Harris, to the other 11 families who had filed suit. Taking her money would mean taking their leverage. I was not going to do that. Marcus asked if I wanted to counteroffer. I told him no. The conversation was over. That night, I called Robert Callahan. He had become something like an ally over the past weeks, though I was not sure we would have been friends under different circumstances. I told him about the settlement offer and my decision. He was quiet for a moment. "You could have taken it," he said. "Most people would have." I told him that was not the point. The point was that other people deserved answers, and I was not going to stand in their way. He accepted that without argument. Then he asked the question everyone was asking. "What are you going to do with the lake? Some of these folks are scared you will lock them out forever. Others think you should." I told him I did not know yet, that I had an idea, something my grandfather might have wanted, but I needed to think it through before I said anything. After we hung up, I walked down to the dock. The lake was still, the sky clear, the air carrying the first edge of autumn cold. My grandfather had protected this water for 60 years because he understood what happened when careless people gained control of something irreplaceable. Sandra had proven him right. But the families who bought homes in Pinewood Grove were not like Sandra. Most of them had simply trusted the wrong person. Did that make them innocent? Did it make them my responsibility? I did not know. What I knew was that locking the gate forever would punish people for mistakes they did not fully understand, while opening it without conditions would erase everything my grandfather had tried to preserve. Neither option felt right. Neither option felt like him. I sat on the dock until the cold forced me inside. The legal battles would take months, maybe years. Sandra's fate was out of my hands, but the lake was not. Whatever I decided would define what this fight had actually been about: revenge or responsibility, resentment or something harder to name. I was not ready to choose yet, but I knew I would have to. And soon. 6 months later. The legal cases reached their conclusions. Sandra Thornton pleaded no contest to 3 counts of real estate fraud. The judge sentenced her to 3 years probation, $150,000 in restitution, and permanent revocation of her real estate license. She was barred from holding any fiduciary position in North Carolina for the duration of her probation. The class action settlement awarded $1.2 million to 23 families, distributed according to their documented losses. Sandra's assets were liquidated to cover the payments. Thornton Realty ceased to exist. The woman who had controlled Pinewood Grove for 15 years disappeared into the kind of quiet life that comes after public disgrace. No interviews, no apologies, just absence. I could have locked the gate forever. I had every legal right to do so. The lake belonged to me, and the community that had harassed me, threatened my job, attacked my girlfriend, and believed every lie Sandra told had no claim to anything I owned. Part of me wanted to make them live with the consequences of their trust in the wrong person, but that would have meant becoming something my grandfather never was. He had kept this lake private not out of spite but out of responsibility. He understood that some things require protection, not from everyone but from those who would exploit them. Sandra was gone. The people who remained were not her. I announced my decision at a community gathering by the lake shore. Over 100 residents came, uncertain what to expect. I told them I was establishing something called the Clearwater Lake Community Trust. The lake would remain my property, but Pinewood Grove residents would have regulated access under specific conditions. $200 per household annually, used exclusively for maintenance and conservation. No commercial use, no motorized boats, No advertising of lake access in any future real estate listing without explicit written disclosure that access was a revocable privilege, not an ownership right. The HOA would have no authority over the trust. An independent board, including 2 residents elected by the community, would oversee operations. Anyone who violated the terms would lose access permanently. The crowd was silent when I finished. Then Robert Callahan stood up. His voice was rough when he spoke. "You did not have to do this, after everything. You did not owe us anything." I told him he was right. I did not owe them anything. But my grandfather had said once that the lake was not his to sell because it belonged to everyone who came after him. His job was just to make sure the wrong people did not control it. Sandra had been the wrong person. These families were not. They had been deceived, just like I had been targeted. Punishing them for her crimes would not honor what my grandfather built. It would betray it. A month later. The first families used the lake under the new arrangement. Children swam near the dock. A retired couple fished from the shore. Someone brought a picnic basket and spread a blanket on the grass where my grandfather used to sit. I watched from the cabin porch, feeling something I had not expected. Not triumph, not closure. Just the quiet recognition that I had made a choice my grandfather would have understood. Sandra wanted a war. I gave her consequences. Wars destroy everything. Consequences end, and when they end. What matters is what you protected and what you left behind.